Bands of heavy rain continue slowly spreading northeastwards, with showers easing this evening across the south and the east, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome, this is Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, standing in for Darren Grimes once again on TV, radio and online. Now, many of us are feeling the pinch with our increased energy bills, and now Russia has indefinitely closed the gas pipeline Nord Stream 1. Does this mean things are going to get even harder for us through the winter? And with NHS job vacancies in England at a staggering new high and more than 10 million patients on hidden waiting lists for NHS care, today we'll be discussing the big question whether our healthcare system needs a complete overhaul. Also, I'll be joined in the studio by the political commentator Dominique Samuels. But first, it's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Emily. 1 minute past 2. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Russia says it's keeping its Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline closed after finding a fault during maintenance. It comes just a day after G7 countries, including the UK, agreed to put a price cap on Russian oil exports to reduce Moscow's ability to fund its war in Ukraine. Russia has blamed sanctions for hampering operations. However, Brussels says they're using gas as an economic weapon. Lower gas flows have left European countries struggling to refill storage tanks for winter and could lead to energy rationing. Mikhail Gorbachev's coffin has begun its journey to the Moscow cemetery, where he'll be laid to rest. Earlier, a memorial service was held for the Soviet Union's last ever leader. However, President Putin denied him full state honours and said he was too busy to attend. The politician will be buried alongside his wife. Bus journeys in England will be capped at £2 from January to help families struggling with the rising cost of living. The Department for Transport says the scheme could see some passengers save more than £3 per ticket. The cuts, which were announced by the Transport Secretary, will run for 3 months until the end of March. Grant Shapps says the next PM may decide to keep the scheme.
That will be up to them how they prioritise funding. And I think, to be fair, they'll want to see how this actually works. Does it attract people to the buses? Does the simplicity of knowing that you'll never pay more than £2 for your bus fare for a single journey help attract people back to the buses? I think it will. but it would be great to be able to collect the data and then for decisions to be made from there. In the meantime, people know headed into the winter that this is a bit of real cost of living help.
Avanti West Coast's managing director has stepped down following a backlash over timetable cuts. The rail firm says Phil Whittingham will leave on the 15th of September. That's the same day that new strikes are going to be taking place. The company currently operates a significantly reduced service due to staffing issues, with only one train an hour between London and Manchester. Police are investigating how protesters were able to gain access to the House of Commons chamber yesterday. Extinction Rebellion activists glued themselves around the Speaker's chair. They draped banners on the Palace of Westminster and padlocked themselves by the neck to railings. 8 people were arrested during the security breach. Leader of the House of Commons, Mark Spencer, told GB News protests like this actually harm democracy.
These types of protests in these locations will put further barriers between our constituents and the MPs, and I think that's unhealthy for our democracy, and it's unhelpful to MPs.
NASA's attempt to launch its Artemis 1 moon rocket has hit another hitch due to a hydrogen leak, which now appears to be fixed. It follows a failed attempt earlier this week, with liftoff postponed due to a temperature problem in one of the engines. Launch from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida is still scheduled for around 7:15 p.m. UK time. The energy crisis is forcing manufacturers to consider cutting production or closing down altogether, according to new research. Trade association Make UK, which represents manufacturers, says half of firms surveyed have seen their electricity bills shoot up by more than 100% in the past 12 months. Around 1 in 8 have already made job cuts as a result of increased bills. Over 1.6 million care home residents, staff and housebound people in England can receive their autumn coronavirus vaccine booster from Monday. NHS England says health teams will visit care homes and private residences in the latest phase of the vaccine rollout. It will then be expanded to involve 26 million people over the next few weeks, including the over 50s. Staying with vaccines, and the UK's medicines regulator has approved an updated booster made by Pfizer-BioNTech, which targets 2 coronavirus variants. The booster shot has been approved for people aged 12 years and older. The MHRA says the decision was based on data from a clinical trial showing that it triggers a strong immune response against both the original and Omicron variants of the virus. Thousands of new emergency beds will be given to shelters as part of a government scheme to end rough sleeping in England. The 3-year plan, costing £2 billion, will see 14,000 new beds introduced over the next 3 years. Over 2,000 supported homes for those with the most complex needs will also be delivered by March of 2025. The International Atomic Energy Agency says the damage that's been done to Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is unacceptable. It's currently inspecting the facility, which has been under the control of Russian forces since March. 2 members of the watchdog will stay there long-term, with a full safety report set to be published early next week. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Thanks, Ray. I think I've changed gender in a matter of seconds. I am Emily Carver, of course. I'm standing in for Darren Grimes. Here's what's coming up on the show. So, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has said too much management burdens the NHS frontline and that he wants to crack down on bureaucrats within our health service. Many of us will rely on the NHS in our lives, so we want it to be as efficient and effective as possible. But does it need a complete overhaul? Also, do we need to revamp our motorways? The Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, and to be Prime Minister probably, said she'll look at whether motorway speed limits should be scrapped and would possibly remove smart motorways as well. Trains are always in the news, but considerably more of us travel by car. We do our commute by car, we pick up our children by car, we do all sorts. So what do you think? Would you drive on a motorway with no speed limit at all? And There were shocking scenes yesterday as climate activists glued themselves together around the Speaker's chair in the House of Commons whilst they were on a tour of the venue. How concerned should we be about this stunt from Extinction Rebellion? Have they highlighted a weakness in security at the Houses of Parliament? I think so. Anyway, of course, your views are much more important than any of mine. And today, in Solve the Palaver with Emily Carver, I'm asking you, is it time to pull the plug on net zero? This, of course, is in light of Russia indefinitely closing Nord Stream 1. Do we need to really focus now on our own energy supply? Tweet me at GBNews. You can get in touch on GBViews at gbnews.uk by email. Of course, you can also watch us online on YouTube. Thanks very much for tuning in. Lots to get stuck in, too. So, the next Prime Minister is going to have to stand up to the eco-zealots. Yesterday, we saw a bunch of doom-mongering eco-warriors bike-lock themselves to the gates of Parliament, erect banners in New Palace Yard, and even glue themselves around the Speaker's chair in the House of Commons chamber. A good day at the office for these professional activists, but for the rest of us, a definite sign of what's to come. The likely leader, Liz Truss, has said she will lift the fracking ban within days of getting the keys to number 10. She plans to approve more oil drilling in the North Sea. Faced with the reality of sky-high prices made worse by Putin's indefinite suspension of Nord Stream 1, that's the key gas pipeline from Russia to the West, this is the common-sense thing to do. I'd go further than that and say it's our moral duty to increase supply as much and as quickly as possible. But it's not going to be an easy ride. I don't suppose climate protesters are simply going to sit by and allow us to get cracking with fracking, are they? Instead, they'll kick up an almighty fuss, loudly oppose any initiative to produce more oil and gas, and disrupt those few that eventually do go ahead. Of course, they don't care about the fact we desperately need more oil and gas to keep businesses afloat and families warm this winter, or the harsh truth that there's absolutely no way we can survive on renewables alone for at least the next couple decades. This afternoon, there are a handful of Just Stop Oil extremists occupying a tunnel they dug themselves under a key delivery route for the nearby oil terminal in Thurrock, Essex. The same Thurrock where the Conservative-run council has reportedly spent a whopping £1 billion on a green energy spree over the past 7 years. That's 4 times its annual spending on services they're spending on green technology, including 50 solar panels. But it's hardly surprising the eco-loons feel emboldened to kick up a fuss over plans to increase our gas supply, is it? Successive governments have fallen hook, line and sinker for net zero dogma, signing us up to arbitrary targets, writing them into law, and even setting up unaccountable quangos to hold them to it. As I say, the government is going to have to ignore the cries of the likes of Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil and their assortment of bizarre spin-off groups. Eco-extremists seem more than happy to spend a night or two in a prison cell for their beliefs. Indeed, they wear it as a badge of honour. Makes sense if you truly believe the world is only days, weeks, months away from combusting into flames. It's our politicians, though, that have left us unforgivably exposed to the whims of a criminal aggressor with sociopathic tendencies. To stand up to Putin and to keep the lights on at home, the government is going to have to pull the plug on the eco-zealots. Of course, those are just my views, so please do get in touch at gbviews at gbnews.uk to tell me what you think. Do you think we need to pull the plug on net zero to ensure our own energy security? Anyway, we're going to move on to something else that is extremely important to all of us, many of you at home, of course. Now, 2 years ago, the NHS topped the list of what makes Britons proud. Now, with millions of us waiting for basic treatment and more than 10 million patients waiting for follow-up care on what's been called hidden waiting lists, have you lost faith in the service? Perhaps you at home or a loved one has been waiting weeks or months for a routine operation. Maybe you're considering even going private to jump the queue. I know many of us are now considering that. Now, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has said he plans to root out waste, wokery and dead wood. It sounds good to me. It probably sounds quite good to you at home, but is that really enough? It may be a step in the right direction, but does the NHS need a fundamental overhaul? Now, to discuss this very, very important issue, I am joined by Dr. Andrew Vallance-Owen. He's a former medical director in the NHS and Chief Medical Officer of Bupa. I'm also delighted to be joined by GBNews viewer, Julia from Northumberland, who has worked for the NHS for around 20 years, I believe as a psychiatric nurse. Is that right, Julia?
Yeah, that's right.
Now, Julia, I think you told our researchers that you're concerned about recruitment in the NHS.
Yeah.
What have you experienced?
Very much so.
Are nurses leaving in their droves?
Not particularly where I work, I haven't seen, but yes, the numbers are saying that they are leaving in droves. And the problem, it isn't about them leaving, it's about them coming back. Some people retire, and when they come back, they get normal nurses' pay. The pay goes right down to the bottom. Who's going to go back and work in the NHS with all that experience, all those years behind them, and come back and work in the NHS for about 50% less pay? That's what's happening. The private sector, sorry.
No, sorry, continue.
In the private sector, newly qualified nurses in their first year of working in the private sector get on average about £8,000 more a year than they do in the NHS. They also get, in their second year, it goes up to about £13,000 more in the NHS. So there's that problem. People are leaving the NHS to go and work in the private sector. To be fair, though, that's not surprising, given that qualified nurses leave with a £60,000 debt. If I was young again and I was still wanting to be a nurse, I would definitely consider that. That would put me off. £60,000 worth of debt. That's where the problems are. That's the problem.
Yeah, Julia, I was just wondering, what do you think about the fact young people have to go to university for, I don't know how long the course is it 3 years? Three years. Do you think it's necessary for people to go to university to become a nurse?
I do and I don't. They get very good experience at university, but they also get a lot of placements to do. We have student nurses where I work, and they go through certain things that you have to sign. They have to qualify at a certain level. Yes, I do think it should be a degree, but I also think maybe if when they've qualified, that debt, if the government was to say to them, tell you what, you work for the NHS for 7 years after qualifying and we will pay that debt off. That would encourage a lot more people to become nurses, I think. And there's a 40,000 shortage of nurses at the moment, at this very minute in time.
What do you think we have to do? Because it's going to take years to train nurses up, to do a recruitment drive, to campaign, to get people to stay. What do you think? Do we need to try and persuade retired nurses perhaps to come back in? Or do you think we should be recruiting from abroad?
I definitely agree with retired nurses coming back, and a lot of them want to come back. But like I said, the pay goes down to band 5. When there might have been a band 7 or a band 8 with all that experience. But recruiting from abroad, why? That's going to cost more in the long run. If we just paid nurses while they did their training as in a degree, I do think that would make a massive difference, and we wouldn't need to recruit from abroad. Why do we in this country always want to do that rather than see to the people in our own country and get them jobs?
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. It seems to be an absolute failure to plan ahead at all in terms of workforce. We're left in a situation where we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough GPs, we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough God knows what within the NHS, and people are struggling to even get an appointment these days. What do you think about Steve Barclay, the current Health Secretary's idea that there's far too much management, far too much bureaucracy, far too much God knows what, diversity and inclusion managers and so on?
Yeah, well, we do need diversity and inclusion managers, I would say, because you can't be told to think in a certain way. But 20 years ago, gay people weren't accepted particularly well in communities. And that didn't happen in the NHS. But as such, but you need people to understand that everybody's different. Nobody's the same, but everybody should be accepted. However, I do agree with a bit of there's too much management, possibly at the top. There's too many, what's that saying? There's too many chiefs and not enough Indians. That's the problem.
It does seem like that. I mean, of course, during the pandemic, we all went out and praised the NHS and praised the workers who worked in the NHS, but it does seem like the whole system isn't serving the people who work within it and also the public, because it's very hard for people when they can't get an appointment for God knows how long, they can't get basic treatment. We're talking about these hidden waiting lists, so people getting their first appointment, but then not the follow-up care that they desperately need. Doesn't seem to be much joined-up thinking. Now, you're a nurse. How much pressure is there on the NHS, on NHS nurses, due to the lack of mental health support or due to the lack of social care?
Yeah, it feels sometimes very pressurised, but to be fair to the NHS, in my experience, I've never had a problem where I couldn't go to a manager and say, look, I feel really stressed. What can we do about it to manage this? And there's always something to be put in place where, in my experience, it can feel really, we are working flat out at the moment, and I'm not joking. We've all got backlogs of patients, whether we work in the community or whether we work on wards. And some of the reason for that, I believe, is that social care doesn't work. And we try and get patients from the NHS into social care, but there's not enough beds. They don't have enough beds in social care now, or they don't have enough staff. So we've got around, at this moment, 10,000 patients in the NHS waiting to be discharged, but we can't discharge them because there's nothing out there for them to be discharged to.
Now, Julia, would you, of course, there's been lots of talk of nurses and doctors going on strike. Would you join them on the picket line?
Oh.
It's a tough question.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, because I do believe we need more pay, especially with the inflation. It is very difficult. A lot of us have to work overtime or even bank shifts just to get enough money to maybe go out and do something nice. That's our pocket money. Overtime is our pocket money. But in my experience, we're all really dedicated, and it's not money that we want. If it was money that we wanted, we certainly wouldn't be working in the NHS, we'd be working in the private sector.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Thank you very much for joining me, Julia. I think we lost the doctor, unfortunately, but it was really nice to speak to you and get your real life experience. That's what GBNews is all about. Thank you for joining us. Hope you keep listening and watching. Thank you. Now, Dominique, what did you make of that?
I thought she spoke so much common sense and, she seemed like a brilliant lady, but she raised some good points. Why would you come out of retirement from working in the NHS only to have your wages slashed by 50%?
Yeah, I must admit, I did not know that was the case.
That's absolutely ridiculous. I think the problem in this country is, part of it is, there isn't enough incentive for people to actually want to work in the NHS. That's why I do feel as though nurses should be paid more fairly. Don't think we should be importing nurses in from overseas. Instead, we actually need to face our problems instead of trying to run away from them and actually make these sorts of jobs attractive to people in this country. And particularly when it comes to nurses and the debt that they have or the need for them to go to university. Personally, for me, I don't really feel as though a nurse has to go to university to be able to qualify to be one. It's vocation. It's a vocation, so therefore the sort of training should be more vocational, sort of like you would if you were an apprentice. So
yeah,
therefore
this
you get
is
paid.
something that family members of mine, older family members of mine have always been completely bemused about, why nurses need to be university educated. It seems that for absolutely every job nowadays, you need to have had a degree, a long qualification. It all adds to the cost of living for people. And I do think people have been talking about how some young people simply won't be able to go to university or will drop out because of the cost of living. I don't understand how people are going to be able to afford their rent, their energy costs, on top of the student fees, on top of God knows what else. You can only get so much in a loan and as a grant. It's going to be really, really hard for students. I do wonder if that might make people reconsider. But in terms of the NHS fundamentally, we didn't really get onto that. I was hoping to speak to the doctor about the NHS as a big institution. Yeah. Do you think it fundamentally needs reform?
I do think it needs reform. I don't think it's competitive enough. And I think that's why a lot of people now are looking towards the private sector to sort of skip the queue in a way, or get paid their fair share, because as that lady noted, nurses are actually paid more in the private sector. And look, I understand that the NHS isn't supposed to be a place where you make money, but it should be a place where you're serving the general public, but you also have a decent wage and don't necessarily have to go to food banks, for example. And I think that's really important. But generally, I think our politicians have been far too scared of actually addressing the problems within the NHS. The Tories have embraced really a socialist view of our healthcare system and how it should be run. Personally, for me, I would back sort of a partly state-subsidised insurance-based system.
Yes, like we see on the continent.
Yeah, like in Europe, and we praise all of these countries as sort of socialist utopias of equality, but many of these countries either don't have a minimum wage or their healthcare system is insurance-based, like in France, for example.
It just seems like in this country we're so afraid to have this conversation, although I will note that more and more mainstream news outlets are talking about the NHS in very different terms than they used to. It used to be our NHS, our beloved NHS. Now it's the Sunday Times doing a massive piece 2 weeks in a row about how the NHS needs a rethink, which I think is quite a big step change in how the public are receiving information about the NHS anyway. I guess those waiting lists, those waiting times, which have only got worse because of the pandemic, are changing people's perceptions. And I think it's time to be honest. Anyway, we've got plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. Don't forget, I want to hear all your thoughts on today's Solve the Palaver with me, Emily Carver. In light of Russia indefinitely closing Nord Stream 1, how do we stabilise our energy supply? I'm asking, is it time to pull the plug on net zero? Tweet me at GBNews or email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Wonder where you went?
Rather wet in the west with a mix of sunshine and some showers elsewhere. Here are the details. Much of the West Country will have a grey evening with some outbreaks of rain. The rain will be mostly persistent across the moors, with the driest weather across the southeast of England and East Anglia. Southeast England and East Anglia, though, will have a largely dry evening with some late spells of sunshine. However, the odd shower can't be ruled out. Eastern Wales should also be largely dry, but western parts will have a rather grey and wet evening with the rain heavy in places. Now, most of the daytime showers across the Midlands should ease away this evening, but one or two may linger on. It'll be a rather warm evening, though, with temperatures remaining in the high teens. Heading over to northern England, and we will continue to see some rain throughout the evening, with the heaviest rain likely across Northumberland and Cumbria. It'll be breezy too, especially along the east coast. The yellow rain warning remains in effect across southwest Scotland this evening as the heavy rain continues here, but further north should be dry with some late spells of sunshine. Yellow rain warning also remains in effect across the whole of Northern Ireland, with a wet and increasingly windy evening expected here. Temperatures will be around the mid-teens throughout the evening. Overnight, we'll see further heavy rain across western and northern parts of the country, with perhaps some fog developing into the southeast. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, so we're going to find out who's won the Conservative Party leadership election on Monday. I bet you at home can hardly contain your excitement. It's been a rather long contest, hasn't it? Numerous hustings, more than a few gaffes, plenty of wild policy proposals, but rest assured it'll soon be over and we'll have a new Prime Minister. It looks like Liz Truss is going to be the woman for the job, at least she's the favourite in the polls of Conservative members. Joining me now is Nigel Fletcher. He's a political historian at King's College London. So Nigel, it seems that Liz Truss is going to be the next Prime Minister. Now she's a favourite within the Tory membership, of course, but do you think she's a favourite with the public at large?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. I think some of the polls that have been conducted are notably unreliable because they are testing something which is asking the public to sort of imagine how they will feel about a future Prime Minister. So I think we can take a lot of those polls with a pinch of salt. And also, traditionally, we've come to expect that a new Prime Minister will get some kind of a bounce in the polls. So it may be some while before those will settle down. So I think events, as Harold Macmillan famously said, are what really drives prime ministers nowadays in the sort of modern media age and with much more complexity in politics. So I think we'll have to wait and see. I think it's a bit early before she's taken office to reach a conclusion on that.
Now, one of the things people said about Liz Truss was that she's not a good communicator. I think she improved a little bit over the course of the leadership campaign. Do you share that view?
Well, I think what's certainly true is that she has managed to surprise people over the course of the leadership. If we think back to the very beginning of this contest, it really was wide open. If we'd been having the contest a year ago, I think the consensus was that Rishi Sunak was by far in the lead as the Chancellor and having had been seen to have had a good pandemic, as it were. And of course, earlier this year, when he fell foul of a number of unfortunate stories in the papers and so on, he was seen as being completely out of contention. So in some ways, the fact that he even reached the ballot was surprising. And Liz Truss's emergence as the front runner was also surprising. During the parliamentary stages, if we remember back, it seems a very long time ago now, but there was a lot of talk about Kemi Badenoch, there was a lot of talk about Penny Mordaunt, and it wasn't clear that Liz Truss would even reach the final ballot. So I think this has been a very surprising Conservative leadership election, certainly compared with some of them that we've seen where there's an obvious front runner, and contrary to what a lot of people tend to say, the front runner has generally tended to prevail in most of these races. But in this race, well, the front runner looks like winning, but the front runner has changed several times.
Now, you're a political historian. How much can we compare? Is it fair to compare Liz Truss to Margaret Thatcher? Is she Thatcher 2.0 or not so much?
Well, I think there's always this temptation in the media, particularly, to draw comparisons with previous female prime ministers. And I think that is rather unfair and somehow superficial to one degree. But I think it's certainly true that Liz Truss very consciously seeks to emulate Margaret Thatcher in terms of her economic policy. And I think if we can characterise her very simply, I think she is clearly an economic Thatcherite. She's a true believer in that sense. And so we have a very clearly ideological candidate for Prime Minister, which I think will be very interesting. And I think the comparisons with Margaret Thatcher in that regard are well made. There are, of course, many other differences. And when you look at Margaret Thatcher and her term of office, some of the myths that have prevailed since she left office, including those by her supporters, don't quite match up to the reality of how she governed. So I think you have to be careful with some of these comparisons. But certainly in respect of the economic outlook and the sort of economic policy that Liz Truss clearly believes in, I think in that regard it's safe to say that she certainly is a Thatcherite.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Sorry, that was a very quick interview, but thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I think Liz Truss certainly does want to appear to be Thatcher 2.0. Anyway, let's see if she can actually do as much as Thatcher did with her short time as Prime Minister, perhaps. Anyway, you're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Next, would you welcome scrapping smart motorways and speed limits on the motorway? Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says she'll consider it if elected. We'll be discussing that shortly, but now it's time for a check on the news headlines with Ray Addison.
(2). Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Russia says it's keeping its Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline closed after finding a fault during maintenance. It comes just a day after G7 countries, including the UK, agreed to put a price cap on Russian oil exports to reduce funding for Moscow's war in Ukraine. Russia has blamed sanctions for hampering operations. However, Brussels says they're using gas as an economic weapon. A man is threatening to crash a stolen aeroplane in Mississippi in an ongoing incident. People have been posting videos on social media of what appears to be a twin-propellered aeroplane flying around the city for a number of hours. Tupelo Police Department says the pilot is threatening to intentionally crash into a branch of Walmart. The reason for the threat is not yet known. The emergency services are evacuating people from the area and asking everyone to stay away. We'll bring you more information on this story when we get it. Bus journeys in England will be capped at £2 from January to help families struggling with the rising cost of living. The Department for Transport says the scheme could see some passengers save more than £3 per ticket. The cuts, which were announced by the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, will run for 3 months until the end of March. NASA's attempt to launch its Artemis 1 moon rocket has hit another hitch due to a hydrogen leak, which may now appear to be fixed. It follows a failed attempt earlier this week, with liftoff postponed due to a temperature problem in one of the engines. Launch from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida is scheduled for around 7:15 p.m. UK time. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back to Real Britain in just a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, in the media, we're guilty of always talking about train travel, but it's mostly wealthy commuters, really, who use the trains the most. We talk about rail workers striking, we talk about the price of tickets, and so on, but the majority of us actually rely on cars to get around for our commutes, to take children to school, to go to the shops, and so on. For many people living in rural areas, it's simply the only way to get around. Anyway, Conservative leadership hopeful Liz Truss has hinted at the prospect of speed limit-free motorways. Sounds pretty fun. It's what they have in Germany. She's also said she wants to scrap smart motorways if she wants to become Prime Minister. Of course, they've been linked to many deaths and crashes, and many people feel they are very dangerous indeed. So to discuss this, I am joined by Editorial Director of What Car, Jim Holder, and also founder of Fair Fuel UK, Howard Cox. Now, Jim, do you think this is a good idea to scrap speed limits on motorways?
Yeah, so it's motorways only is the proposal. Ultimately, no, I think it's a pretty flawed idea when you really get into the detail of it. And unfortunately, it's the detail that matters. You know, it will be sold on a time-saving and economic benefit. But when you look into the increased fuel consumption from travelling just 10 miles an hour faster at those speeds, you'll soon lose any time gains you make. You'll lose the economy gains, the financial gains that you make, because you'll be spending it in extra fuel economy. There's more noise. The roads need better maintenance. You have to police these roads much more carefully. The accident rates, the evidence from other countries around Europe proves go up as you increase the speeds. That puts greater pressure on an NHS that is already strangled. So it's a great shame to say it. I would love to live in a country where we could do this and do it properly, but I don't believe that we do.
Howard, I think, you know, as someone who's instinctively libertarian, that people should be able to take personal responsibility and decide what speed limit is safe. For example, coming into London from Berkshire, there's all sorts of different speed limits at different times. I actually think it's quite dangerous to be adapting the speed limit all the time. Suddenly you're in a 40 zone on a 3-lane motorway or A road, and it's all a bit confusing. Surely that's dangerous.
I think you're right in that respect. I agree with Jim that I don't think we should actually get to unlimited speed limits. I mean, that would be ridiculously dangerous because there's a lot of boy racers in us, and some of us, I'm afraid, would actually take advantage of that, and it will cause more fatalities. But your point about the actual speed limits all over, they're not consistent. I think Jim would agree with that. What we need to do is it's all down to conditions. If it's congested, we should have low speed limits. I'm all for that. But if it's free, visibility is good, and the road is dry, it's not pouring rain, everything's safe, we should have maximum speed limits. And I think the motorways should be up to the equivalent that's in Europe, which is maximum of 80.
Now, Jim, do you think, as editorial director of What Car, do you think that the government has a bit of a vendetta against car drivers, considering their net zero targets? Do you think they want to make it a bit more difficult for people to travel by car? Is Jim there? No, I think we've lost Jim. Howard. Oh, Jim's there.
Sorry, I'm here. Absolutely, the government could do far more to support motorists. You know, I think there are many things that Howard and I could agree on. But I think net zero is part of a wider picture that needs some sympathy and some common sense applied to it. Now, you know, you can go too far and you cannot do enough. And so you're treading a line constantly along that route. But I think we can see today, you know, when do you drive on a motorway? How often do you drive on a motorway and you don't encounter roadworks? You don't encounter hold-ups. You don't encounter poor lane discipline. You don't encounter drivers who can't cope with changing speed limits. So to introduce more of those things, more of those variables that already confuse drivers, I think that's what the absolute crux of this point is, and why the change really doesn't add up.
Now, Howard, smart motorways, what exactly are they there to do differently to, I don't know, what's the alternative? A stupid motorway, a smart motorway. Are these the motorways, what I was describing before, are they simply when the speed limit changes and you don't also have a hard shoulder in some places?
Well, you're absolutely right. I wrote a piece this week in The Sun to explain the fact is I was delighted with Liz Truss at last doing something for road users, because I'm afraid not having a hard shoulder is absolutely scary. We've got 1.7 million supporters, and a lot of the stuff in my intro of people are absolutely scared stiff on smart motorways are breaking down. And there are little lay-bys where you can pop in between. I can't remember the exact distance. They vary on different smart motorways. But fundamentally, if there's a 40-ton truck bearing down you and you break down in the slow lane, I'll be scared witless. So we need to get rid of those things. And this smart motorways are basically trying to get some road development on the cheap. That's what's happened, adding an extra lane without paying for it, fundamentally, by just using an existing bit of tarmac, the government doing it on the cheap. We must go back to safety.
Now, Jim, just finally, now, am I right in thinking that about 60 to 70% of the price at the pump that drivers pay when they fill up is government taxes?
I think Howard would have the exact percentages, but what you're hinting at, I think,
it's a huge, Jim. It's a huge amount we spend when we fill up our car.
It's about half. It's about 50%.
About half goes to the government. Would you like to see Liz Truss, if she does become the Prime Minister, take away some of those levies?
I want to see
GBNews. Sorry, Jim. Sorry, go on.
Support everyone on the cost of living. I think it's a very fair point that the government has been raking it in against the additional cost of fuel. You know, the percentage take that they take from fuel duty has been extreme for the last few months, and we have been paying for that. Now, obviously, this is a government that is under huge financial pressure. But if it wants to get the country moving, it wants to stimulate the economy, it wants to try and get all of the problems that we have battened down a little bit, then this would be a quick and easy measure to help a lot of people, yes.
There we go. Now we're going to have to leave it at that. Sorry, Howard, you didn't get a last word in. We'll speak again, I'm sure. Thank you very much for joining me. That was Howard Cox of Fair Fuel UK and, of course, Jim Holder from What Car. Now, moving on, there were extraordinary scenes in the House of Commons yesterday as Extinction Rebellion protesters glued themselves around the Speaker's chair. The cunning protesters snuck away from a guided tour of Parliament, where they initiated the protests and read out a speech demanding a citizens' assembly on issues surrounding climate change. Now, how on earth was this all allowed to happen? Joining me now to discuss this is security expert Will Geddes. Will, so how on earth was this allowed to happen? I just said what they did, detailed their actions. Surely someone could have clocked this.
Well, one would have hoped. Emily, thank you for inviting me on the show today. Yes, I mean, it's one of those difficult ones. The Houses of Parliament and the Houses of Commons have both had issues where individuals who've either protested or even terrorists, for that matter, have tried to breach, obviously, the secure perimeters of that Palace of Westminster, if you like. But where the challenge is that the police, for example, will patrol and secure the exterior parts, because being servants of the monarch isn't allowed to enter the Houses of Parliament, and nor are the police. So the security within the actual Houses of Commons are protected by what they call the 37 doorkeepers. These are 37 individuals that are responsible for the physical security controls. Now, as you rightly say, what we've seen with Extinction Rebellion is they managed to draw away from a tour, of which there are many, many tours every week, which are available for the general public. But it raises some serious question marks as to what they're doing, because we have seen these breaches before. And are they really on top of their security procedures, particularly the fact that, OK, they might be able to sneak in with a small tube of super glue to glue themselves, obviously, to furniture. But some of them had placards within the House of Commons by the Speaker's chair. How were they able to bring those in?
Yeah, and it's also bizarre as well, not just how they managed to get in, but also they were able to put up a massive banner in the main area outside the House of Lords in that courtyard. How on earth did they get away with that? And how was it there for so long? I walked past myself and it seemed like nothing at all was being done.
Well, again, the police are always going to be very careful in how they deal with particularly proactive demonstrators like Extinction Rebellion. However, certainly there is Part 69 of the Public Disorder Act and Criminal Justice Law, which does actually address trespassers in a particular fashion. And in Extinction Rebellion, all of those protesters were arrested. Now, whether they've been charged or not, we'll find out in due course. But the police are careful because many of these protesters will have individuals dotted around in various places recording their actions. Now, whether that be through smartphones or whether it be through professional cameras, the police can't be seen to be heavy-handed. So they will assess it carefully. And particularly when there are individuals, as there were on this particular protest, that went up scaffolding and on the side of the building, you can't simply just, as I probably would like, Emily, and you know me well enough, I'd probably just pull them off the actual scaffolding. The police have to obviously have a duty of care when they do so.
Well, I mean, I think most people sitting at home would be rather bemused that the police aren't allowed to just take them down. It does seem that on the continent, the police forces are a little bit more heavy-handed when it comes to such things. Now, I was saying in my monologue at the start of the show that I think there's going to be a rise in the number of these types of protests. We've seen Just Stop Oil blockading petrol stations and other oil and gas companies making a nuisance with their the way that their oil and gas is being moved around the country and so on. I think that Extinction Rebellion are going to kick off because Liz Truss is, of course, given the green light to fracking if she becomes Prime Minister. What can the police force do to prepare for such things?
Well, I think they need to be a little bit more heavy-handed. I mean, my personal view on it, in certain parts of the world where I've operated, they probably shoot them off the scaffolding.
OK, we don't want that, Will. That's a bit too far.
No.
That's a bit too far.
I'm not saying that we resort to that, Emily, by any means. But what I would say is that, yes, I think when these individuals are removed from heights or removed from various locations or unbonded when they've stuck themselves to various pieces of furniture or parts of the building, that it needs to be done very cautiously. But these individuals need to be charged accordingly. And I think there should be custodial sentences. Now, that's not to say that we're going to stop them entirely from doing it, but there will be many do-gooders, if you want to call them that align themselves to these groups and participate in these protests. It might dissuade them thinking, well, you know what, I may come from Middle England and I've come down for a bit of a protest. Well, I could end up being incarcerated, having a criminal record, and that will obviously blemish my future, my career, and many other reputational aspects for me in the future. The Stop Oil people are a slightly more troglodyte version of Extinction Rebellion, if you can call them that. And certainly those individuals have been involved in very specific, as you say, on the forecourts, the very specific criminal damage. Criminal damage is criminal damage. And I think, you know, the courts cannot be light on the sentencing for these individuals. Pack them away. And if they're complaining that they're protesting for the benefit of us all, well, maybe highlight your causes, and you might actually have some of us join your causes through slightly more pragmatic and sensible protest, rather than things which is just going to cause chaos, cause us taxpayer money to police and to protect against.
There we go. Will Geddes says, not quite hang them and flog them, but definitely put them behind bars. Thank you very much, Will. That was Will Geddes, security expert, of course. Now, Dominique, what do you think? Did you agree with my monologue at the start of the show where I said we're going to see an uptick in these events and we need to get tough on them?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think they've actually been emboldened partly by our government and numerous MPs that espouse the same sorts of extremist green views that these extremists do. They can say that they don't believe the government is acting, but when you look at what the government has committed itself to with regards to net zero, this requires drastic change in our society, and I don't think that's something they've quite grasped. Personally, for me, I do attribute the current energy crisis to the Green Zealots and all of the money that they've been pumping into various protest groups designed to actually bypass democracy and convince our politicians to pass ludicrous laws that disenfranchise people in this country. For example, our lack of energy dependence now, which means we're so reliant on on importing gas. For example, this craze for electric cars, which, because of the current energy crisis, it'll actually be more expensive to charge your electric car at home than it will be to fill up your car with petrol.
And this is the problem with central planning. Our politicians seem to think that they know the future of the energy market. They know the best future technologies. Why electric vehicles? Why not hydrogen-powered vehicles or some other kind of source that we don't know yet? And this is the problem with handing over such complicated policy matters to bureaucrats and also, well, politicians who are in cahoots with the Green lobby, much of them. Anyway, we must move on. What's been described as the great unretirement appears to have really taken off, with firms such as McDonald's launching recruitment drives for pensioners. A record 174,000 over 65s re-entered employment in the 3 months to June. It's fair to say this could be due to the concern of the rising cost of living. I doubt it's just simply because they're bored at home, although who knows, perhaps you at home have gone back to work because of that. But can we expect a seismic shift in the job market when it comes to recruiting pensioners, or is this just a phase? Joining me now to discuss this is psychologist Sir Carrie Cooper, CBE. Hello. So why do you think that firms are pushing to recruit older people?
Well, I mean, it's inevitable with the inflation rate being what it is, cost of living. Pensions just aren't keeping up to date, Emily. And I mean, we're going to get more and more. That's one element of it. I think people also are retiring a lot later. They're healthy for longer, and they want to do maybe a different job, not the job they did all the way up to 65 or 62 or whatever. But now they want to try something a bit different for stimulation. By the way, employers, we have a problem. We just don't have a skilled labor force. We heard that a couple of days ago, didn't we, from Rishi Sunak, who said there's a problem, part of which obviously is Brexit, because we lost a lot of people on a whole range of sectors. Also, if we have the highest inflation rate in the G7 and in the in the other parts of the world, not just the G7, but broader than that. The OECD figures were, again, one of the highest in terms of inflation rates and one of the lowest in terms of pay. So we're not attracting as many people from abroad than we should. We've lost the EU people, many of them. We're not attracting because our wages aren't very good. Our inflation rate's extremely high, much higher than France, Germany, many other countries. And therefore, we need actually the over 65s to come back and fill a lot of jobs, whether it's, drivers and for lorries, buses, trains. Look at the train system we have at the moment. Avanti is only having one train from Manchester to London every hour, and it used to be 3 just a couple months ago.
Carrie, sorry to stop you there. I just wanted to ask you, what do you think that over 65s have to offer the workforce that perhaps younger workers might not? How can they be good workers as compared to their youthful counterparts?
Well, experience, developing their social skills. You know, we say with younger people, we think you should be working when you go to university, for example. You know, you should, like I came from the States. I worked all the way through high school, all the way through university, because I came from a working class family. I had no option. I developed skills in doing that, right? But we in this country don't do that with younger people. Older people develop their skills. Social skills, interpersonal skills, business skills, a whole load of skills. Plus, they have a lot of experience. They can make a contribution. The probabilities are they won't go in the same job they were in before because it's likely to have been a very stressful job, maybe long hours, a lot of pressure, but they're likely to make a major contribution. And indirectly, by the way, there's another potential benefit, the dementia. If people stay psychologically and cognitively active, they're less likely to get dementia or to
Yes,
be
I mean, I
extended.
have colleagues. I have colleagues, sorry to interrupt, I have colleagues who are working well into their 70s, and I suspect that I will too, not just because we're living so much longer, but because 65, well, because of that, 65 feels so young, I think. Do you think that there is a strong argument to increase that pension age? Because 65 for a lot of people, you know, my parents are in their early 60s, and they're very much still active and young.
But a lot, Emily, depends on the job you're doing. There's some jobs, it'd be very difficult to sustain that job into your 70s. I don't. I think we ought to keep the pensions the way they are right now. But what we ought to do is encourage people to do something more active at, you know, beyond their pensionable age, whatever it is, depending on the nature of the job they do. But if you talk about the police and you talk about nurses and you talk about there are certain professions where they're extremely stressful, and really 65 is a good time to go. But that doesn't mean they couldn't do something different. And that's what the interesting thing is. That's where our developments are. We need these people. We just need them. We just don't have them.
Yeah, I'm not sure with McDonald's being on your feet all day would be particularly good for some very elderly people, but perhaps it's okay for a 65. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. That was Sir Carrie Cooper, CBE, Professor of Organisational Psychology. Thank you very much for your time.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, radio and online. Now, this hour we'll be discussing the big news that Russia has indefinitely closed the Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline. And we've got political commentator Dominique Samuels with us all through the show, and we'll also be getting some top tips on how to be classy. We shall see. We've got a lovely, elegant lady coming into the studio to give me some advice on how to be my best self, my most elegant self. Anyway, first, it's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Emily. Coming up to 1 minute past 3, here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Russia says it's keeping its Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline closed after finding a fault during maintenance. It comes just a day after G7 countries, including the UK, agreed to put a price cap on Russian oil exports to reduce Moscow's ability to fund its war in Ukraine. Russia has blamed sanctions for hampering operations. However, Brussels says they're using gas as an economic weapon. Lower gas flows have left European countries struggling to refill storage tanks for winter and could lead to energy rationing. Mikhail Gorbachev's coffin has journeyed to the Moscow cemetery where he'll be laid to rest. Earlier, a memorial service was held for the Soviet Union's last ever leader. However, President Putin denied him full state honours, saying he was too busy to attend. The politician is being buried alongside his wife. A man is threatening to crash a stolen aeroplane in Mississippi in an ongoing incident. People have been posting videos on social media of what appears to be a twin-propellered aeroplane flying around the city for a number of hours now. Tupelo Police Department says the pilot is intentionally threatening to crash into a branch of Walmart. The reason for the threat is not yet known. The emergency services are evacuating people from the area and asking them to stay away. We'll bring you more information on this story as we get it. Bus journeys in England will be capped at £2 from January to help struggling families with the rising cost of living. The Department for Transport says the scheme could see some passengers save more than £3 per ticket. The cuts, which were announced by the Transport Secretary, will run for 3 months until the end of March. Grant Shapps says the next PM may decide to keep the scheme running.
It will be up to them how they prioritise funding. And I think, to be fair, they'll want to see how this actually works. Does it attract people to the buses? Does the simplicity of knowing that you'll never pay more than £2 for your bus fare for a single journey help attract people back to the buses? I think it will. But it would be great to be able to collect the data and then for decisions to be made from there. In the meantime, people know headed into the winter that this is a bit of real cost of living help.
Let's stay with transport, and Avanti West Coast's managing director has stepped down following a backlash over timetable cuts. The rail firm says Phil Whittingham will leave on the 15th of September. That's the same day as new train strikes are scheduled to take place. The company currently operates a significantly reduced service due to staffing issues. Only one train an hour travels between London and Manchester. Police are investigating how protesters were able to gain access to the House of Commons chamber yesterday. Extinction Rebellion activists glued themselves around the Speaker's chair. They draped banners from the Palace of Westminster and padlocked themselves by the neck to railings. 8 people were arrested. Leader of the House of Commons, Mark Spencer, says protests like this can actually harm democracy.
These types of protests in these locations will put further barriers between our constituents and the MPs, and I think that's unhealthy for our democracy, and it's unhelpful to MPs.
In developing news, a second liquid hydrogen leak has put the attempted launch of NASA's Artemis 1 moon rocket into doubt. It follows a failed attempt earlier this week in which engine temperatures caused liftoff to be postponed. Launch from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida was scheduled for around 7:15 p.m. UK time. We'll keep you up to date on this story here on GB News. The energy crisis is forcing manufacturers to consider cutting production or closing down altogether, according to new research. Trade association Make UK, which represents manufacturers, says half of firms surveyed have seen their electricity bills shoot up by more than 100% in the past 12 months. Around 1 in 8 have already made job cuts as a result of increased energy bills. Over 1.6 million care home residents, staff and housebound people in England can receive their autumn coronavirus vaccine booster from this Monday. NHS England says health teams will visit care homes and private residences in the latest phase of the vaccine rollout. It'll then be expanded to include 26 million people over the coming weeks, including those over the age of 50. The UK's medicines regulator has approved an updated booster vaccine made by Pfizer-BioNTech, which targets 2 of the coronavirus variants. The booster shot has been approved for people aged 12 years and older. The MHRA says the decision was based on data from a clinical trial showing that it triggers a strong immune response against both the original and the Omicron variants of the virus. Thousands of new emergency beds will be given to shelters as part of a government scheme to end rough sleeping in England. The 3-year plan, costing £2 billion, will see 14,000 new beds introduced over the next 3 years. Over 2,000 supported homes for those with the most complex needs will also be delivered by March of 2025. The International Atomic Energy Agency says the damage that's been done to Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is unacceptable. It's currently inspecting the facility, which has been under the control of Russian forces since March. 2 members of the watchdog will stay there long-term, with a full safety report set to be published early on next week. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Emily.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. So here's what's coming up on the show. Russia's gas pipeline to Germany will not reopen as planned. The firm behind it claimed they found an oil leak in a turbine on the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, meaning it would be closed indefinitely. But is that true? And with the rising cost of living, energy prices soaring, and now the pipeline indefinitely closing, do we need to be braced for a cold winter? And one story that caught my eye this week was a list of the 10 things classy women never do. These include chewing gum, staring at people, talking loudly on the phone. I'll find out what an etiquette expert makes of all that. And of course, your views are much more important than mine. And today in Solve the Palaver with Emily Carver, I'm asking you, is now the time to pull the plug on net zero? Tweet me at GBNews. You can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch online too on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Now, Russia says it's keeping its Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline closed to Germany closed after finding faults during maintenance. This comes just a day after G7 countries agreed to put a price cap on Russian oil exports to reduce Moscow's ability to fund its war in Ukraine. The news comes, of course, during a time of growing fears that families across the whole of Europe won't be able to afford the cost of heating this winter. Joining me now to discuss this is former British Army Commander Richard Kemp and Niall Gardner, a foreign policy analyst. Thank you both for joining me. I'll start with you, Colonel Richard Kemp. Can we say 100% that this is not due to a technical fault?
I can say that absolutely 100%, but of course I don't know for sure, and my word is of no particular value, but I think it's highly likely that this is a very predictable step in Vladimir Putin's attempt to apply pressure to the West, to Europe, particularly to reduce their support for Ukraine, because he knows, and we all know, that European countries are suffering directly as a result of their support, both in terms of the amount of money being spent on arms and financial backing for Ukraine, as well as the sanctions that are in place, which obviously have an effect in both directions. And that problem, the situation that we face, is only going to get worse as the winter sets in, and he knows that. And that's why he's timing his war, using energy as a war, he's timing it to exert maximum pressure. And I think it will have an effect, because already unfortunately we've seen the support for Ukraine dropping off in opinion polls in Europe. We've seen wavering among some countries. We will see, I think, more of that. So it's a sound strategy on his part, and it was very predictable. And unfortunately, we have, if anything, over the years, we have made a policy like this much more likely and much easier for him to implement by making ourselves so reliant on Russian energy.
Now, Richard, before I go to Niall, which countries within Europe, which European countries are most likely to start looking at this situation and reassess their support from Ukraine? It seems to me that they're already starting to weaken their resolve, at least in their rhetoric.
Yeah, well, I think Germany is obviously the country that's most affected, everyone's going to be affected by it and is now being affected by it in terms of rising energy prices. But Germany has the greatest dependence on Russian energy, and I think that Germany will certainly begin to crack more than it is now. Italy already was very weak in its support for Ukraine, and I think we're going to see even more of that now. And we're seeing political changes beginning to take place in Europe with the recent and future elections. Which, in for example, Italy, that does include Italy, that does include parties that have been historically more aligned to Russia than hitherto. So, I think from a number of different directions, we're going to see countries beginning to crack. I can't give you an exact sequence. I think Britain, which is the strongest supporter of Ukraine in Europe and probably in the world, is kind of probably the last country to go, but it will suffer. The new Prime Minister, probably Liz Truss, is going to have to rally support from Britain in order to make people understand, if she's able to, that the economic pain that they're going to suffer, and it is going to be very deep economic pain, is a price worth paying to deal with the aggression of Vladimir Putin. Let's not forget, it's not just the war in Ukraine that we're concerned about, it's his future aggression as well. And that's going to be one of her many major challenges she faces.
Yes, I think it is. Now, Niall, of course, we heard from the Prime Minister not too long ago when he went to visit Ukraine. I think he made this statement when he was there. He said it's the Ukrainians who are playing with blood, and we're only paying with, rising energy costs. Do you think, as Richard has said there, that the feeling towards Ukraine, our support for Ukraine, will waver, and that this could be a game changer when it comes to Ukraine's future?
Well, Emily, thanks very much for having me on the show today, and I agree wholeheartedly with Richard's comments here. And this is an act of intimidation, of course, by the Russians, an act of blackmail against much of Europe. And this is the price, of course, that Europe is paying after decades of appeasing Moscow, after decades of dependence upon Russian energy supply. So we're now seeing the consequences of that. I think in the case of the United Kingdom, of course, Britain is less impacted by this, although it will be hurt by the overall big picture in Europe here. I don't think the British resolve in any way is going to be weakened or undermined. If anything, I think when Liz Truss, the likely next Prime Minister, takes office next week, I think Britain will further enhance and increase its level of support for Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. So Brexit Britain, I think, will be the world's biggest opponent of Russia on the world stage. And I don't think that's going to change at all.
Niall, sorry to interrupt, but could this not be seen as a massive foreign policy blunder on our behalf, on Europe's behalf? We said very vocally that European leaders said very vocally that they were going to wean themselves off Russian gas. It was a threat. We had the G7 nations as well agree to this price cap in order to undermine Russia's funding of its war. Could this not be seen simply as a retaliation, as this is something that we should have foreseen and been prepared for?
Well, without a doubt, I think that Europe, especially the European Union's overall approach towards Russia in terms of energy dependence, it's been an absolute disaster. Appeasement never works. And the Russian strategy, of course, here, as Richard pointed out earlier, is to try and weaken support within Europe for sanctions against Russia over Ukraine. And my sense is that some European countries are going to buckle and break here. France may be at the forefront of that. After all, Emmanuel Macron's been pushing for negotiations with Russia over Ukraine against the wishes, actually, the Ukrainian government. And I expect that you're going to see Macron groveling towards Putin, as he always does, licking the boots of the Russian dictators, what Emmanuel Macron has done, on numerous occasions. And so this is the Russian strategy. They understand that Europe is weak, especially the Western European powers, France, Germany, Italy, for example. The strongest resolve in Europe, of course, comes from Great Britain and also from Poland and our Eastern Central European allies. But without a doubt, I do think you are going to see some European countries buckling. Their energy policy has been an absolute catastrophe, frankly, a disaster. And this is what happens, actually, when you place a dependence upon a dictatorship like Putin's Russia. So we are seeing the consequences of that now. But it's vitally important, of course, that Great Britain leads the free world in standing up to the monstrous evil of Vladimir Putin's Russia. And I think that under Liz Truss as the likely next Prime Minister, Britain is going to be even stronger on the world stage standing up to Putin.
Richard, I do think it's going to be a very tough sell to people at home who will be struggling with the rising cost of living. We've been talking about earlier in the show and across the channel about how it's not just individuals in their homes, but businesses are going to go to the wall. We've seen energy bills up multiples and multiples of what they were only a few months ago. Businesses are going to shut their doors. Could be a massive recession, people losing their jobs. What can we do to essentially end this crisis in Ukraine as quickly as possible if we're not going to be seen to appease Putin or to come to some sort of agreement with him? What can we do to make this last as little time as possible?
Well, I agree with what Niall said about how Britain is leading the world, really, in standing up against Vladimir Putin. And, of course, it's something that we have historically done in Europe. We've historically stood up above all other European countries to oppose dictatorship and impose people who want to apply their will to us and to our European friends. And so it's natural that Britain would take the lead, and that lead must include rallying other European countries to maintain their support. And I know that the British Foreign Office, have had diplomats touring different European capitals to try and encourage them not to waver in the face of Putin's pressure. And I think that's an area that we can show a lead. But to do that, of course, we have to make sure that we set the example. And that's what we have been doing as well by supplying a significant amount of weapons. We have to supply more, I think. And, there may not be that many more available, but somewhere they have to be found, because I think the only way really to shorten the war and to hopefully bring it to a conclusion that we want is to arm the Ukrainians even more than they are now and support them in other ways. One of the things that's often not spoken about is intelligence, and military intelligence and intelligence from our national intelligence services have been invaluable, as have the Americans, in supplying targeting information to the Ukrainians to allow them to be as much more effective than they otherwise would have been. And that kind of assistance needs to continue. But I think above all, the message has to go out to Putin that we're not going to waver, we're not going to weaken, we're not going to buckle under, and we're going to do everything we can in our power to support Ukraine to keep its fight going. And as I said earlier, that has to also be extended. Our lead there has to be extended across Europe. I don't think we're going to have much influence on America. I think President Biden will do what he does. And his support's actually, although it could have been stronger, his support has been pretty strong, and they've supplied a huge amount of money. But our role really is, I think, in making sure America stays on track as far as we can, but particularly making sure Europe does.
Well, that's a mammoth task. Thank you very much for joining me, Richard Kemp, Colonel Richard Kemp, former British Army commander. And, of course, we also have Nell Gardner, a foreign policy analyst. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.
What do you make of that, Dominique? You were sat there, I could see you sort of shaking your head a little. Do you think that our resolve should be weakened?
I knew you were going to come to me because I was making so many faces. But if I'm being quite frank, and yes, I'm going to be...
This is the home of free speech.
...controversial here, I just felt like both of them sounded as though they were on another planet. And I think that comes from a place of not actually experiencing some of the issues that everyday people are going to experience as a result of this war. Boris Johnson said that people in Ukraine are paying with their blood. That's absolutely right. But what do you think poverty does? What do you think not being able to heat your home does? What do you think rampant inflation does? that actually does kill people as well. And I think that it's easy to say, you know, we need to rally around Ukraine, we need to do this and that, but you actually have to look at the people in this country that are suffering as a result. And to say that, you know, wanting negotiations with Ukraine and Putin is bootlicking, I don't think that makes enough sense to me.
In theory, I would love if, as the West, home of liberal democracy, we could confront Putin and end this war in order to ensure peace on our continent. But as you say, that seems like a lofty aim when people at home are facing sky-high costs, sky-high bills, energy prices rising, and Putin seems to be always one step ahead in terms of seeing our leaders as the largely weak people they are.
And you have to actually look at the timeline as well. Richard Kemp spoke about providing more weapons, even though, you know...
Where's the money for all these
weapons? There's not very many weapons left. How long is this actually going to take? Because the West knows that this war isn't actually impacting Putin in the way that I think they thought it would. It seems that he's actually making a lot of money from the war in itself, so it can go on forever, really. And also the fact that Russia's calling this a special military operation. It's not yet conceded that this is a full-blown invasion. So therefore, Russia's actually not using all of its military might. So we're treating this as a proxy war in the West. We're not actually getting fully involved. That means it's going to go on for a lot longer than I think a lot of people are willing to accept.
Yes, and I think inflation and rising energy costs are going to be here to stay for much longer than any of our leaders have admitted to us yet anyway. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. Don't forget, I want to hear your thoughts on today's Solve the Palaver with me, Emily Carver. As Russia closes Nord Stream 1, is it time to pull the plug on net zero to ensure our own energy security? So tweet me at GBNews or email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk and we'll go through all your opinions before the end of the show. First, let's have a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be rather wet in the west with a mix of sunshine and some showers elsewhere. Here are the details. Much of the West Country will have a grey evening with some outbreaks of rain, which will be most persistent across the moors. The driest weather will be across southeast England and East Anglia, with late spells of sunshine. However, the odd shower can't be ruled out. Over to eastern Wales, should also be largely dry there, but western parts will see a rather grey and wet evening, with the rain heavy in most places as well. Most of the daytime showers across the Midlands should ease away this evening, but one or two may linger on. It'll be a rather warm evening, though, with temperatures remaining in the high teens. Into northern England, and we'll continue to see some rain throughout the evening, with the heaviest likely to be across Northumberland and Cumbria. It'll be breezy too, especially along the east coast. The yellow rain warning remains in effect across southwest Scotland this evening as the heavy rain continues here, but further north should be drier with some late spells of sunshine. That yellow rain warning also remains in effect across the whole of Northern Ireland, with a wet and increasingly windy evening expected. Temperatures will be around the mid-teens throughout the evening. Overnight, we'll see further heavy rain across western and northern parts of the UK, with perhaps some fog developing in the southeast. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Welcome back. Now, experts warned this week that we may face energy rationing this winter. It could see people told not to cook until after 8 p.m. It could see pubs closed at 9 p.m. We could have a 3-day school week, care homes cancel outings for residents, and swimming pools left unheated. As we just discussed, major Russian gas company Gazprom extended their shutdown of gas flows through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline to Germany. This is the biggest pipeline for gas from Russia to Europe, and supplies through the pipeline are seen as crucial in preventing the worsening energy crisis. I mean, we need the gas from somewhere, don't we? Well, joining me now is Malcolm Grimston, Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Tech at Imperial College. Now, Malcolm, how reliant was Britain on this gas coming through Nord Stream 1?
Directly, we were relatively unaffected. Only something like 5% of our total gas came indirectly, obviously, through Nord Stream 1 and then made its way across Europe. We provide a bit less than half of our own gas from our own reserves in the North Sea. We get a bit less than a half of it from Norway, and then the rest of that, about 1 day in 7, if you like, a mixture of sources, including imports from the United States and Qatar, and some through the pipeline. But of course, it's not just about the supplies, it's about what happens to the price of gas in Europe. And there we are deeply affected by the price spikes that we're seeing, in part because of the Ukrainian situation.
Now, what are our options here for policymakers right now? We have a supply crisis, our bills are rising at the rate of knots. How can we increase supply as quickly and efficiently as possible?
Well, the immediate thing is to try and increase the amount from other suppliers. So Norway, which is our major source of imports, is looking at whether it can increase its capacity. The Netherlands produces quite a lot of gas. It may be able to increase it. And other sources like Algeria in North Africa. In the slightly longer term, we can look to see if we can import more liquefied natural gas. This is natural gas that comes in tankers across the ocean rather than through pipelines like Nord Stream 1. The United States, because of the fracking revolution, has huge amounts of gas potentially available. But we do have in Immingham and in Milford Haven, we've got ports that now can take those imports, but we're probably going to have to build some more. That's not overnight, but that could probably be done realistically within a year. Big question, though, is the extent to which the States and Canada are prepared to increase their exports. But if we assume they play ball, then we can see that not just the UK, but Europe as a whole could shift some of its gas demand to liquefied natural gas rather than pipelines.
Now, I saw this week that there was a glimmer of good news that the wholesale price of gas had gone down a bit, which would indicate that hopefully our bills would do the same. Has that been completely torn apart by this most recent news of this pipeline being closed?
Yes, I mean, it's the nature when you're in an extremely volatile situation that you tend to get overreactions and then corrections. But until there is a sustained period, and that really means several months, of the gas price beginning to come down, I think we'd be very foolish to read anything into quite short-term issues. Just 3 days ago, when the Russians said they were going to extend the non-usage of Nord Stream 1 by another 3 days, so that was just on Thursday, we saw gas prices across Europe go up by 10% in a single day. So I don't think we should read too much into it. So clearly, if they come down a bit, that's a better thing than if they've gone up. But I think we're not yet at the stage where we can put any confidence or any be terribly complacent in any sense about short-term reductions in the gas price. And even after that reduction, it was still running at 8 or 9 times where we were a year ago.
Now, we were asking throughout the show, we're asking viewers their views on whether, we were asking those at home, whether net zero has got us to this place to some extent. Of course, we couldn't have accounted for this most recent supply shock, but has our obsession with decarbonisation come at the expense of our energy security?
Well, funnily enough, particularly with nuclear, if we'd been building nuclear stations 15, 20 years ago at a reasonable speed, that would leave us like France at the moment, which has a lot of nuclear. That would have resulted in us both having lower carbon emissions and being a lot less dependent on imported gas. And similarly with renewables, where they're appropriate, they can deliver on both the low carbon and on the energy security front. Where I think we got it wrong was we didn't continue to recognise that we're going to need a lot of natural gas and continue to develop our own natural gas reserves as a short-term measure until nuclear and renewables were ready to produce enough, because that has left us very, very dependent on imports from elsewhere in Europe. The UK is in a better position in some ways in that we do have our own reserves, but a worse position in others in that we do use rather more gas, particularly for electricity generation, than some of our European neighbours. So we're not in any sense immune from what's going on in Europe. I think you can do low carbon and secure supplies at the same time, but at the end of the day, it is security of supply followed by economics that I think are the really important things when it comes to us in our everyday lives. And we need to make sure that we get those right and deal with the environment alongside those, rather than putting the environment in a special box and thinking that security and cost is not important, because it clearly is.
Yes, I think we've got things a little bit mixed up in terms of priorities, perhaps. Thank you very much for joining us, Malcolm Grinston. That was Malcolm, who is, of course, a senior research fellow at Imperial College and an expert on all things energy. Thanks for joining us. So, you're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Now, before 4 p.m, we'll be discussing the top 10 things women never do if they want to be classy, apparently. Etiquette expert Liz Brewer is coming into the studio to teach me a thing or two. But first, it's time to check on the news headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Emily. It's exactly 34 minutes past 3. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Russia says it's keeping its Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline closed after finding a fault during maintenance. It comes just a day after G7 countries agreed to put a price cap on Russian oil exports to reduce funding for Moscow's war in Ukraine. Russia has blamed sanctions on hampering operations. However, Brussels says they're using gas as an economic weapon. A man is threatening to crash a stolen aeroplane in Mississippi in an ongoing incident. People have been posting videos on social media of what appears to be a twin-propellered aeroplane flying around the city for a number of hours now. Tupelo Police Department says the pilot is threatening to intentionally crash into a branch of Walmart. The reason for that threat is not yet known. The emergency services are evacuating people from the area. They're asking others to stay away. We'll keep you up to date with the latest on this story as we get it here on GB News. Bus journeys in England will be capped at £2 from January to help families struggling with the rising cost of living. The Department for Transport says the scheme could see some passengers save more than £3 per ticket. The cuts, which were announced by the Transport Secretary, will run for 3 months until the end of March. A second liquid hydrogen leak has occurred ahead of the scheduled launch of NASA's Artemis 1 moon rocket. It follows a failed attempt earlier this week in which engine temperatures caused liftoff to be postponed. Launch from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida is still scheduled for around 7:15 p.m. UK time, and we'll keep you up to date if that changes here on GB News. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio. Don't go anywhere. Emily's back in just a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Right, we're back. Anna Bay, an elegance coach from London, has revealed the top 10 things women should avoid if they want to be considered elegant and classy. She says it's all in the little details.
Have you ever wondered what makes elegant people different from the rest of us? Well, believe it or not, it's actually in those small details that the rest of us don't pay attention to. My dear elegant ladies, let's find out what those details are.
So we won't make you watch that for too much longer. A few examples on the list are being passive-aggressive, not pushing your plate away at the end of a meal, and not speaking loudly on the phone whilst on public transport. That's what apparently makes you elegant. Perhaps I need some help with this. I'm not sure. I consider myself reasonably elegant, or at least polite. So let's see. Joining me now is etiquette and behaviour expert Liz Brewer. Now, you disagree with some of the things that this lady had to say. She said...
I think there are about two that I agreed with.
Go on then.
Load of rubbish. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And this ghastly word, classy. Have you used that word?
I don't like using that word out loud. I was reading it and I thought...
You don't use that. And you also, she referred to something about pudding. You can't leave or go to the loo in the middle of a meal. Well, I'm sorry. You know, if needs must, you excuse yourself.
Got to go, you've got to go.
And you don't call it dessert. It's this business. And this thing about toilet. We have a beautiful British language where we call the loo, or the bathroom, or going to powder my nose, going to the men's room. We do not call it the toilet. That's a French word. We don't need the French word. We don't call dessert. We call it pudding. We're British. Let's be proud of our language. But if you want to go through them, I will thrash through them with you.
Go on then, very quickly.
Okay.
So, the obvious one at the start, don't be rude or snarky to another person.
You know, the Brits are very good with a look or with sarcasm, but sarcasm done in such a way that nobody's quite sure, are you being rude? Do we accept it? So that is, again, I mean, we're good at putting down without nobody really realising it. I could say to you, by the way, sitting on this chair, they're so interesting. I always look forward to coming to the studio because I'm sitting on this chair where I can't put my feet on the ground. You've obviously got men with very tall legs. But I'm going to say, no, it's always an interesting experience. So I'm being sarcastic.
Yes, there's a way of getting your point across.
I'm getting my point across.
Although, to be fair, I think that's also on the list here because that might come under passive aggression. Are you passive-aggressive, Dominique, in your everyday life?
I wouldn't say I'm passive-aggressive, but I'd say I am quite a sarcastic person. And sometimes, well, a lot of the time, people don't know whether or not I'm being serious. So.
Precisely. My point.
So
go through the rest.
Elegant British women should just, let their view across, but in a sort of sneaky way, a little underhanded way. So another one is don't push away your plate at the end of a meal.
Well, I'm going to give you an example of that. I was staying and putting on a dinner in Istanbul, in Turkey, and it was a charity thing, and then it was called Worldwide Fund for Animals or something. Anyway, we had Prince Philip as the guest of honour, and something went wrong with the service. So we were sitting there, and the plates were not moving, and it went on, and finally, I thought, this is ridiculous. So I started. I was 2 away from Prince Philip, and I started to stack the plates. And the woman opposite me said, such bad manners to stack. And Prince Philip stood up and he started to take the plates and said, well, we do in my house.
Ooh. Prince Philip did the arranging of the plates, the clearing of the table.
It's a question of using your common sense and behaviour, especially social behaviour. There is no mystery. There is nobody up there saying to us guys down here, thou shalt not put your elbows on the table. Thou shalt not push your plate away. It's a question of if needs must. And also using your common sense and doing what would be sensible in circumstances, because it's always when something happens and you think, what do I do now? Use your common sense.
Yeah. But do you think that we're getting, Dominique as well, do you think young women are perhaps don't have as good etiquette as they may have done in the past? You know, the ladette culture, the swigging from your bottle of Lambrini on the street, maybe shouting at each other, acting like little hooligans. Little female hooligans.
I think most definitely. I think that's because a lot of the culture that surrounds how women should act, being ladies, is associated with that damned patriarchy. So we need to act as unladylike as possible. But certain things, like if I'm at a restaurant and they don't take my plate, I don't want to look at the scraps of food that I left. So I am going to slightly push it away or cover the plate up with a napkin, and if that's bad manners, then so be it.
Yeah, so young women now a disgrace.
Who is to say it's bad manners? Who is it? Who is this person that says you're not allowed to do
this
that?
Anna Bay?
Yeah, well, I mean, she got so much wrong, it was unbelievable. I mean, it really was. Carry on.
Well, we've got 10 here, so I'm not sure we're going to have time to go through all of them. Let me pick one. OK, so...
The one about going to the loo.
The one going to the loo, yes. Don't go to the bathroom during a meal in a restaurant. Well, presumably it's more polite to do that than, say, soil yourself.
Exactly.
So normally, if you're going out, you're ready when you go out. When you arrive at a restaurant, and she also did this thing about you must leave your jacket or coat with the cloakroom. But normally when you arrive, if you're a woman, you might want to titivate or go to the loo when you arrive.
Exactly.
And then you don't know, are you going to a room which is going to have air conditioning? Is it going to be warm, cold? You don't know. So if you've got a jacket, you normally keep it on. And there are places I go to where I deliberately take my coat with me because otherwise I've got to wait 20 minutes to get my coat from the cloakroom afterwards. So whatever I can do, I could sit on it, I can take it off when I'm there. But going to the loo, I mean, if you needs must. And if you can't sit there in agony, so you politely say, excuse me, you know.
Also, I mean, it's the least of our problems, isn't it? Most people won't be able to go to a restaurant in a lot of time, in a little bit of time anyway, with all these rising costs. Now, you tell me what your tips are for etiquette then. If they're not these ones, these 10 that this lady has quite patronisingly told us, what would you actually give?
What you do is, if you're in a situation you think, what do I do now? You think, what would cause least offence? What would put the other people or person at ease? And what would be the simplest? Use your common sense. That's what it's about.
Use your common sense. Well, the only problem with that, Dominique, is some people's common sense is
don't cause
better than others.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Because I was at an event, and I was told that it's rude to go and get a plate of food first before anybody else. I was told that by someone who I think was probably a bit too self-conscious, and I was just like, well, I'm hungry. The food is ready, so I'm gonna go and get a plate of food. Me personally, I don't like to sort of micro-analyse everything. I'm more go with the flow, and I'm quite confident as well. So I think there's manners, and then there's over-analysing situations.
I think so. You just make everyone around you feel awkward.
Uncomfortable, yeah.
So just as a last thing, Liz,
there's common sense.
In the studio here, obviously we're perched on these seats, which are maybe sometimes comfortable.
Really?
How would you sit on such a seat in the most politeful and elegant way?
Well, you know, this whole business about you should never cross your legs here, that came into being when we were wearing minis and, you know, what I used to call pussy pelmets. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
Goodness me! I've never heard of that.
Yeah, and therefore it was very revealing and wasn't elegant to be able to do that. So it was much easier. So we got in a habit, and then the golden rule: you could never do that. Well, you can do that. I can do that if I wanted, if I'm wearing trousers. It's not good for the circulation, but normally you'd cross them at your ankles. I noticed she said something there, though, about men must never show the soles of their shoes. Well, I can't even remember when some man showed me the soles of his shoes, and I didn't understand that at all. So maybe it's if perhaps men sit with their legs crossed. It just didn't make sense. It didn't make sense.
Well, there you go. We shouldn't listen to what this random lady has to say about how we should all behave. We should listen to Liz, of course.
Use your common sense.
Thank you very, very much for joining me. That was behaviour and etiquette expert Liz Brewer. Now we're going to be sticking with the energy theme. One of Boris Johnson's final acts as Prime Minister has been the promise of £700 million to fund the Sizewell C nuclear power plant in Suffolk. That's quite the exit gift for an outgoing Prime Minister. So is nuclear the key to our future energy security? I'm joined now by Christopher Barnard, Conservative commentator and Policy Director of the American Conservation Coalition. Hi, I'll put that question to you directly. Is nuclear our future?
Hey, well, thank you, Emily, for having me on. And I really do think that when we're looking at the current crisis that not only just Brits, but Europeans and Americans and people across the world are experiencing when it comes to energy, really we should be looking at sources of energy that are not only affordable and clean, but also reliable. And nuclear hits all three of those criteria. So I really do think that nuclear energy should be a part of that. And when you look at countries like France that have pursued nuclear and kept their nuclear plants alive, they're doing much better than countries like Germany that have shut down their nuclear plants. So I really do think nuclear energy is a big part of the future.
I think the problem is, though, in France, they may well have their lights turned off sooner than us here in Britain or in Germany, because their power plants are ageing rapidly. They're pretty degraded in many ways in terms of the tech that they're using. And we're going to EDF, of course, who's the French nuclear, the French energy company, the state energy company now, and we're going to them for our nuclear plants. And one must ask, are they going to be any good?
Well, I think we should look at the track record of nuclear in France. And of course, there are some maintenance issues right now that need to be dealt with. And really, the French government should have been more proactive about making sure that those plants were being kept up to date. But really, France is a country that has kept very clean, very affordable electricity for a very long time. And I do think, broadly speaking, it shows that nuclear energy is something that should be part of the conversation. Now, we should also be looking at next generation technologies like small modular reactors, like the ones that Rolls-Royce are building in the UK. And so I think it's not just a matter of the old nuclear reactors that your grandparents knew, but also these new exciting technologies that we should be adopting.
It's just so frustrating because there's been a clip that's been going around of Nick Clegg when he was in the coalition government, the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, and him saying, oh, there's no use investing in nuclear, and that was back in 2011 because they won't be on stream till 2021, 22, and now here we are in 2022, now just thinking about investing in this Sizewell C. Now, I wonder, are there not cheaper forms of energy that we could get quicker onto the system that we have right now? Surely what must be the priority right now is getting gas supplies.
Yeah, well, I do think that we should be looking at an all-of-the-above energy strategy. And the problem with the Lib Dems was that they went against nuclear, and since 2010, we've actually closed 26 reactors, and we're showing the problems of that right now. But really, when it comes to, for example, natural gas, that's one of the big problems right now is that gas is so expensive because of the situation in Europe and with Russia. And we really should be looking at all of our energy resources, not just picking winners or losers in the energy market. So I really do think that the UK should be pursuing its natural gas resources, as well as its renewable resources, as well as its nuclear resources. It's not just one or the other.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you for joining us this afternoon on Real Britain. That was Christopher Barnard, who is a Conservative commentator and Policy Director of the American Conservation Coalition. Now, it's time for us to solve the palaver with me, Emily Carver. Now, today's palaver was, as we face a possible cold winter, should we scrap our net zero goals? Now, we've got many views flooding in today. Nina kicks us off by saying we should have always focused on being self-sufficient, but it's very short-sighted to suggest backtracking on net zero. The damage to the planet and climate is real, and we shouldn't be looking to solve our short-term problems by destroying our future. Dominique, is it fair to say that these are short-term problems?
No, I don't. I think that it's actually short-termism which has caused the problem in the first place, because we've just gone too fast with erasing nuclear, erasing non-renewable forms of energy. I think we've whittled down our coal usage to, 1.8%, stopped fracking in 2019, completely reliant on natural gas, and increased our usage of wind and solar. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to renewable energy sources, the storage just isn't there at the moment. We've gone way too fast, and I'm not quite sure that using non-renewable forms of energy, getting rid of net zero is destroying our future. I do question this whole climate alarmism narrative that's being pushed down our throats by billionaires in America.
I mean, it has been for decades that we've been told that the world is about to come to an end, and here we are, sitting in the studio in Paddington, alive and kicking from what I can tell. Anyway, Jason agrees with you, Dominique, I think. He says, yes, we should scrap net zero targets and make sure they're on hold till we have a system that is cheap and reliable 100% of the time, regardless of world events. And renewables should only be used to produce excess energy until they have a proven track record of price and reliability that spans 15 years. Now, this is the point as well, that of course renewables are all well and good, and we all want to live in a greener, brighter, more beautiful future on this earth that will last the test of time. But when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, we do get into a little bit of a sticky situation. I guess what we've got to hope for this winter is a warm and windy one, so that we can get as much electricity from wind power here and not have to turn the heating on so loud. Now, Elliot agrees also with Jason and probably me. We need to do it anyway. That's get rid of net zero, regardless of Russia shutting off Nord Stream 1. It's now very obvious that in an uncertain world, we need to be energy independent. If it's a lesson we need repeated, our politicians would simply not be fit for purpose. Now, Chris says, he definitely doesn't beat around the bush. He says, yes, pull the plug on net stupid and start fracking. Now, the only problem with fracking is, of course, that we have a lot of people in this country who would not want to see it in their back garden or anywhere near them. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's going to be a battle at that local level?
it will definitely be a battle at the local level. However, there are new and more innovative ways of actually fracking. There are more environmentally friendly ways that they do in places like Canada. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that detrimentally affects the people that live closest to those areas. But at the end of the day, I think energy independence is far more important than people who just simply don't want it in their backyard. And especially when it comes to, say, you know, wind turbine farms, they're really unsightly, massive. I wouldn't want them in my backyard either, so it's sort of the same thing.
The problem is I have sympathy with NIMBYs who want to oppose well, infrastructure essentially being near them. I do have sympathy. I wouldn't really want a wind turbine. I might not particularly want fracking right on my doorstep. Yeah, perhaps I wouldn't like that big housing development either. That's perhaps a little unsightly. But at the end of the day, if we're going to get our economy, you know, on track, and we're going to have people living in houses, and we're going to have energy security for the future, that means a little bit of compromise needed. That's my plea to anyone who lives in these areas. Anyway, but yes, another quickly is Chris. He says 15 coal-fired power stations in 2015 produced 38% of our electricity. The rush to 2050 sees only 3 left producing 2%. In 1987, 80% of UK electricity was coal-generated. No sensible transition plan has put us in this mess. Forget 2050. Open up oil and coal ASAP.
Completely agree.
Completely agree. You'd start burning coal again?
I would definitely. I don't think the fact that we now use as little as, I think more specifically, it's 1.8%. I don't think that's something that we should be raving about, because we've not actually replaced that capacity. Being so reliant on natural gas, now importing more than we produced domestically, I think last year, that's not a good thing. That means we're more reliant and sensitive to global price shocks. So, yeah, I'd rather have common sense and actually have people able to keep warm than be ranting and raving about climate crisis.
Also, it's quite interesting. I mean, I worked in Parliament for a short time, and the amount of lobbying groups from from various green groups, from various renewables.
That's a very good point.
They all want the money, they all want the subsidies, they all want their technology to be the favourite.
Yeah, because it's become a money-making industry now. A lot of these groups are getting millions from overseas, particularly Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion. Extinction Rebellion had over 3 million in funding last year. We don't exactly know where that come from, but we know that over $500,000 of that came from the granddaughter of the Getty family. So even the background of their funding resides in oil itself, which is completely hilarious.
Well, there you go. I think we've solved the palaver. We've solved the palaver. We've said, you know, I think maybe net zero needs to go on the back burner, at least, if not scrapped altogether. Anyway, you've been watching Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, standing in for Darren Grimes. Thank you very much for your company today. The show is on every Saturday and Sunday at 2 p.m. For now, I will leave you with the weather.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful